It is.
Thank you guys for joining. We're going to pop right into it. This is part of our series on psychological safety, and I'm super excited to have Julie here with me from HR at Heart. And we're going to talk about an area very close to our hearts. In fact, I'm wearing my shirt today, my HR People Are People Too shirt.
Yes.
Because, we don't take care of ourselves enough. And so we wanted to make sure to cover this topic. So we're going to get through this quickly. We're recording as well. And thank you for coming in and joining us today. So Julie, you and I have been talking about this topic for a while. We collaborated on HR Wellbeing Week for those of you who are able to take advantage of that.
Yes.
And we've talked about a lot of these topics. Do you want to kick us off with some of the topics that HR teams are dealing with?
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me, Ali, because I know you could have had so many other people. So I'm glad that you asked me. And it really is great to be here today. We've been dealing with a lot as HR. I mean, as a profession for years. The pandemic has just kind of like put the icing on the cake of all the pressures that we've been dealing with, right? So there was a recent study that I saw that was done by McKinsey, where they talked about these are the new positions that we're seeing at the table for HR right now. And obviously top of mind is DEI, right? Because not only were we dealing with COVID, but we've also been dealing with social and political injustices in the world. And so DEI has been top of mind. But then we have well-being and safety. And one of the positions that McKinsey stated would be a position for HR now, coming up now, would be the Chief Worry Officer. And that position in itself worries me. That they would think of a title such as Chief Worry Officer, but what they're saying the Chief Worry Officer is responsible for is all things COVID related, all things pandemic related. So ensuring that employees are vaccinated, ensuring that employees are wearing their masks, making sure you have all those protocols in place for the office and whatever necessary things are needed to keep the employees safe in their homes, right? Their mental well-being, how do you deal with vaxxers versus anti-vaxxers? And these are the things that they're saying are the responsibilities of the Chief Worry Officer. I don't like the title, that's the honest truth. I think that they really need to do something about that title in itself, but I understand where they're coming from. And then the other position that they mentioned was the Chief Hybrid Working Officer. Oh, so it's like if we didn't have it bad enough already with how do we deal with all of these people in this one building? Now, how do we deal with people who are working all over the world? And so this is another position that's come up for McKinsey and for us as HR professionals. And we're doing all of these things right now, right? But here's the thing. A lot of us are doing these things as a department of one or a department of two. Those of us who are doing these things in bigger teams or have access to HR services, which is like a bigger group of HR that you can point things forward to, are not as big as we thought they were. So when we think about all of these things, it really does point to that question that we ask ourselves, right? How is HR able to cope with all of this stuff? How are we able to have courageous conversations in a safe way about when it's too much? Is that a good start?
Yeah, it is. I mean, and that's, and that's one of the things, like it does seem like things float downhill, right? And a lot of things that, I mean, it's interesting how they're calling these, first of all, they put chief in front of everything, but okay, HR has been trying to get that chief title for a long time, but let's just swoop in. But yeah, things floating down. But the other thing is that the executives that we partner with from an HR perspective, they tend to be a little fragile. And so they're going through their own things, and they can be difficult to manage. and impact the HR team negatively as well. Is that something you've seen too, Julie?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think when it's always been the case that they're expecting HR is always the one that's supposed to know, right? But you also would expect that your leadership also does the homework so that they know certain things as well. And oftentimes that's not the case. They're pointing to HR to get that additional support to get the answer, especially as it relates to people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, it seems like anything that they find difficult, well, the HR should be able to.
It's an HR thing. That's an HR thing.
Exactly. It's an HR thing.
It's not a leadership thing. It's an HR thing.
Exactly. My manager said that HR made the decision to whatever. And then this image here reflects, we keep getting more and more and more piled on top of us that keeps falling into the HR bucket, but without a heavy investment in resources. So what I don't see is a doubling of HR budgets, a doubling of HR teams. We have a doubling of HR responsibility, but not necessarily a doubling of the resources to get the work done.
Absolutely. And according to a SAGE report that was done that talked about the closing of the perception gap between HR and the C-suite, it mentioned just that HR is getting more and more responsibility. And in that survey, they were saying 63% of leaders were saying that they saw the value of having HR at the table. They saw the value that HR brings in times of crisis and change. But 23% of those leaders were saying they didn't think it was sustainable. They didn't think that after COVID was gone, HR would still have the same relevance. Wow. I don't think that's true. I think those things are going to change, and as we look at the perception gap starting to get closer and closer, then out comes more responsibilities, and positions like chief worry officer, chief hybrid officer, chief head of all things, chief cook and bottle washer. That's what I call HR, right? Where we do everything. And so those expectations are there, and they're going to continue to pile on. But rightly, as you said, with that piling on, then comes the fall, right? Because you can't expect that an HR team of 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 can support hundreds or thousands of employees with little to no resources.
Yeah.
You just can't.
No. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about from a psychological safety perspective is what are the key components we need within our HR teams? This last one here is also leveraging technology. How many HR teams are expected to manage their business in an Excel spreadsheet?
Oh, so many. Oh, yeah. So many.
Yeah. So I was talking to a recruiter the other day, and she was saying, that she was having to make the case for an applicant tracking system in this talent market.
It's happening. It's crazy that the amount of HR professionals that I talk to that are still working out of Excel or Google Sheets is just crazy, versus being able to afford a proper HRIS system that can carry the process pretty much end to end. So a lot of times, because I'm coaching HR professionals every day, one of the questions that I always ask before we start coaching is like, tell me what your HR tech stack looks like. Like, what are you working with? And to just hear so many people say, well, I still work in Excel. What do you do in Excel? And how do you provide strategy by using Excel? How reliable is that data? How often do you update it? What formulas are you using? What are you working with? Very much little to nothing below you at least getting Excel training so that you can maximize the use of Excel. No, we're not even getting that. And so all of these things are just completely, I see Denise shaking her head, which means she knows exactly what I'm saying. But these are the things that we are constantly struggling with when it comes to leadership, really appreciating that you can't ask HR to be strategic. You can't ask HR to do all these things and you're not providing us with the necessary resources, be it in terms of budget or people or technology, to get what we need done.
Yeah. So so we don't have to convince everyone who joined us today that there's an issue and a need here, obviously. So why focus on psychological safety? Well, one of the reasons is has been proven as the key differentiator in high performing versus low performing organizations. And so to have psychological safety isn't just, as I say, feel good Friday or free hugs Friday. It's about creating the structure, the expectations, and the environment where people can take risks without concern of negative repercussions. And so these are 6 of the ways in which you can tell if you have a psychologically safe organization. Do people feel like they can be themselves? They can take risks, they can disagree, they can raise problems and issues, ask questions, and make mistakes. And so when we think about that within the context of the HR function, there are several things that are unique about HR as we think about psychological safety. One would be, for example, taking risks. How many risks can we really take within the HR function that wouldn't have detrimental effect on the broader business? And so as we think about psychological safety, there's a structure that, why do you think it would matter that HR is psychologically safe, Julie?
Imagine if, so look at what we're experiencing now because HR is not feeling psychologically safe. We've got burnt out HR professionals. We have HR professionals who are in the grave, literally, right? Or on the verge of. And so the fact that we're not creating this space in HR is very troubling or very worrying to me. And that's why I think it's important for us to have this conversation right now. Oh my goodness, someone just put a picture of a baby on the screen and it completely distracted me. That baby is so cute. Oh my goodness. See, that's how psychologically safe I feel right now.
Yeah, it's, I put this picture here of the foundation having major cracks and fissures in it, because if HR is supposed to be the keeper of the culture, but they don't feel safe, and again, it's not safe to not comfortable, right? It's about being safe. Comfort is no risk, no fear. This is taking risk, putting yourself out there, innovating, being creative, raising issues, being able to say the unsaid without fear of repercussion.
And we're not seeing that. A lot of HR professionals have that. So
yeah, I think
all those cracks will eventually cave in, right?
But I think if we could touch on this a bit, Julie, because you mentioned, the DEI work.
Yeah.
Right. And so think about the load that is on the DEI practitioner in these new functions, these new focus areas. If they don't have the ability to be psychologically safe, to raise problems, to call out behaviors, then progress can't really be made.
No, it can't. And I think what we're seeing, especially in the DEI space, is that a lot of persons who have been hired for those roles are now sharing their stories of frustration, because we've been hired to do a job, but we've been set up to fail because we have no budget. We have a bunch of ideas that we can't take anywhere because either leadership is too afraid. Oh, what will people think if we do that, if we say that, right? And then they're not giving us the budget in order to kind of move things forward. And so these are the major frustrations that we're seeing happening in the DEI space right now. When you start talking about DEI, right, it's really getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. You need psychological safety in that space because people don't know what they don't know. And in order to educate, you have to put people in uncomfortable positions. And a lot of times we're finding that organizations are saying, well, DEI is a nice to have because it's the rage right now. But once people want to get in and get into the nitty-gritty of the work, oh my God, no, we can't do this. we can't do this and we can't say that and we can't have that, and no, that program won't work. And then people in the DEI space start to feel frustrated. They start to feel isolated from not being able to have the conversations that need to be had.
Yeah, that's a great example. And so the other reason it matters is because, you know, if we lack psychological safety, it makes decision making that much more difficult. It also means we don't raise the issues that need to be raised and addressed. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have had several instances where we do an engagement survey, we get back the results, we don't like what we see, and then we kind of don't know what to do with it, right? Because we have our feelings hurt or whatever. And I don't mean we, the people on this call, I mean the executive team. The other thing is, it's really hard to take a leap of faith if you don't have a parachute. And so in many cases, we're put into positions of making difficult decisions, and we have to, you know, craft policy. And if there's not a feeling of support, then, and we don't know if someone will catch us if we fall, that can make that even more risky and us less likely to do the work. You know, 2022 is looking like yet another interesting year. But psychological safety seems to be coming up a lot these days. Julie, are you seeing it as well?
Yeah, certainly. Because I think people are realizing, especially in the HR space, that they do deserve to work in spaces where they do feel safe to share, where they do feel safe to question, and get answers and get support, and to be able to create and innovate, to put products and services on the table that are really going to benefit the organization. And all too often they have these conversations where HR professionals say, I don't feel like I'm safe. I don't feel like I'm appreciated. I don't feel like what I bring to the table is being respected. And I know that I deserve better. And so that's why when we think about the Great Resignation, I always say to people, don't just think of the Great Resignation in terms of your employees leaving the organization outside of HR, because it's happening in the HR space too. The data is there, the stories are there. People are sharing them every day on LinkedIn as HR professionals, saying, look, I've had enough of working in this organization and I'm leaving without a plan B. So HR is leaving without even having another job on the table, another offer on the table, because they don't have what they know they deserve. And so they're going through the recruitment process all over again, just like everybody else. So if that doesn't say anything to organizations, then I don't know what does.
Yeah, it's so true. So there are some things that we can look at when you think about building psychological safety. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons to have it, because of the need for innovation, because of the need to be able to make decisions and support the business. So the first one to look at is, do you have the right structure within your HR function? And one thing that we can overlook is job descriptions and role clarity within HR. Sometimes we're kind of catch as catch can, or we feel like we have to be nimble and we have to be flexible, and that's all very true. But unless we have real clear roles, it makes success more difficult, and that's a proven psychosocial hazard that can decrease people's feelings of psychological safety and trust. So doing the work, and I know it seems like a lot at this juncture, so you don't have to have incredible digital detail, but having at least a clear ownership of, I call it the CEOs of something, right? Clear ownership within the HR function can really help a lot with psychological safety as a structure.
Yeah, I would add to that as well, Alessandra, that having a relevant job description, because a lot of times I find HR professionals, people in organizations in general, you come into an organization, you've been there for 5 years or 4 years or some 2-3 years even, and your job has changed so much. But when I ask, so does your job description reflect what you're doing now? No. So then how do you expect to have a clear conversation about whether or not you deserve a salary increase when you haven't even profiled your job, you know? And then as HR teams, understanding that you have that breakdown in terms of like creating a matrix of who do you go to, who makes these decisions, and how do you get to this person, and who's responsible for recruiting, who's responsible for putting a job up, who's responsible for compensation, who's responsible for well-being. If I want to take this particular thing from here to here, how do I do it? If you have a proper matrix that people can understand and flow through it easily, it makes life a lot easier for the people that you work with.
And I think doing that exercise, those use case scenarios of, okay, somebody leaves. Okay, now what? Okay, now we know what happens and who does what, can be very clarifying. Yeah. The other piece of structure that I recommend is looking at shared goals with the business. So tying the work you do back to specific business outcomes, but make that not where it has to be where it's a shared goal, because having conflicting goals is another psychosocial risk that can undermine psychological health and safety. So if we're not working towards the same outcome, that creates a lot of conflict. And so having those shared goals, especially with the business and shared outcomes, can be really helpful. And that can include things like, let's say with recruiting, you want to make sure that the managers get their feedback to you by a certain period of time. We have to have accountability on both sides, because the goal is to get people hired. And it shouldn't be, I can do whatever I want, and then HR has to pick up the slack. So making those shared goals very clear can be also helpful in building psychological safety for HR. The other one I wanted to talk about was environment, and considering what's the environment that's impacting your HR team. And are there things that can be adjusted or that need to be accommodated for? So is there seasonality within your organization and you need more or fewer people at different times of year? Are there huge supply chain issues that are causing pressure in different parts of the business? Just looking at the environment around your business and around your team, because that stuff, it gets in. How many of us have been on a team where the team next to us or the team we have to work with is incredibly dysfunctional, finger pointing, etc.? That seeps into the psychological safety of our teams as well. Julie, do you see this and the environment having something to having impact on psychological safety?
I do. It's so funny that you said that, because when you just mentioned like the team that's right next to you, I remember in one of the organizations that I was in, the finance team was super toxic, super toxic, and to the point that most of the disciplinary issues that we had as HR were with the finance team. And we would see a lot of increase in attrition in that team. And it got to a point where for us, it started to impact how we were working with each other. And so I totally agree that, yeah, environment has everything to do with helping you with psychological safety in your team. If you're not seeing that, the worst place you could not see it is in leadership.
Yeah.
Awful. So true. How do you then create a psychologically safe HR team if you have a dysfunctional leadership team?
Yeah. And the other thing is also making sure that you nurture and take care of your HR team. Don't have them be ignored, be less than. Spend the time as the leader of the function or as members of the team in creating the type of work environment that you want to work in. Make it the house that you built. Ooh, doggies. The other is to make sure that you just said, Julie, about toxic behaviors, and to reset cultural expectations around what is acceptable and what isn't. Addressing those head on is incredibly important. Even if someone is the keeper of the knowledge of fill in the blank, that doesn't give them carte blanche to, leave bodies in their wake. And so having clear expectations, but to your point, Julie, that has to start from the top, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I would say, even though if your organization doesn't have a code of conduct, then you should at least have a code of conduct within your HR team. What will you accept? What won't you accept as a team from each other, and then from the people that you serve, so that everyone is on the same page. I think that that's really important too.
It's a great one. And then you have this acronym you use called SAFE. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I always say that a healthy HR professional is a safe HR professional. And SAFE stands for an HR professional who practices self-care. So the S is for self-care, making sure that you are doing the things that you need to do to keep your cup full, or at least at the half mark, but never running on empty, right? So there's this analogy that we all know that everyone uses, which is, you got to put on your safety mask first. But I've been having a debate with a few of my colleagues over LinkedIn on this, because when you are asked to put on your oxygen mask, it is usually because something is happening on your flight that means that you are either going to be heading to your impending doom, and then in that instance, then what good does the mask do you? So I know it's like, before you can help someone else put on the mask, and it just helps you to breathe so you can take your last breath properly before you die. That's how I look at it. Whereas when we say you can't fill from an empty cup, but you can refill your cup. If you keep refilling your cup, like how you refill your gas tank on your car, or you power it up with the battery if your car is electric, but you're always replenishing that power, right? Why don't we do the same thing for ourselves? So self-care is about replenishing, keeping your cup full, or at least keeping it at half so that you can constantly give to others. The A stands for awareness, right? And it's not just about being aware about others, but being aware about yourself. So in the moments where you recognize that you are not taking proper care of yourself, that you have an awareness that says, I'm not practicing proper self-care for myself, and I need to either dial it back or do something that's going to help me to put self-care back into perspective for me. The F stands for forgiveness, because a lot of times as HR, we're dealing with a lot of stuff, sometimes stuff that's triggers our ethical compass, that makes us feel like, I know better, I could have done better, I should have done better, but I didn't. Either because I fell to or succumbed to the pressure of leadership, succumbed to whatever pressures the organization was putting on me, and I did or said something that I shouldn't have. So the F is for forgiveness. In order to move on, in order to have a good relationship with yourself, means you have to have a good relationship with forgiving yourself. We talk a lot about loving ourselves, but we don't talk enough about forgiving ourselves. You can't love yourself if you don't forgive yourself. And so I think it's important to sit in the mirror or stand in the mirror. And in those moments when you've done stuff in your job or in your life in general that has caused you to feel like, I should have done better, I should have known better, then when you get that moment, stand in that mirror and say to yourself, you know what, I forgive you. Because in the moment, you for whatever reason, weakness, whatever imperfection, you didn't do better, but now you know that you should do better. And so I think that F is really important. And the E stands for educate. Educate yourself. Constantly educate yourself. So the responsibility of upskilling and reskilling doesn't just lie with the organization because you work for an organization. It also sits with you. You are the CEO of your career. You are the CEO of your life. So constantly educate yourself. Be the 10, 20 steps ahead of the organization, of yourself, when it comes to HR practices, but also just practices in general. Because I think a lot of times I've learned more outside of HR than I've learned in HR. So I think it's really important to look at the stuff that's happening on the outside, because a lot of times it will help you to be a better HR practitioner. I get just as much joy with talking to HR colleagues as I get with talking to people who are not in HR. Because then I learn something that's going to help me either be a better coach or be a better HR consultant. So educate yourself. So that's my SAFE model: self-care, awareness, forgiveness, education.
Lovely. Okay, well, that wraps us up. There's our 30 minutes. Thanks again, Julie. If you want to connect with Julie, you can do so on her LinkedIn. And you can also reach out to me, Dr. Al. I'm Alessandria Polizzi. And I wanted to plug, Julie has an Empowered HR Accelerator program. You want to talk about that for a little bit, Julie?
Sure. So my Empowered HR Accelerator program, I created it for HR professionals. So essentially, this is how do we connect the dots between theory and practice? Because a lot of times what we learn in college or university leaves out a lot from what actually happens on the job. So this is a 6-week program where each week we're going to tackle a different part of our function, from understanding the business of the business, understanding how we embrace HR tech, how do we create the best tech stack, how do we get the best knowledge and education, how do we make sure that we are taking proper self-care procedures for ourselves. So lots of self-care tips. Each session is going to start with a mindfulness session. So we begin on a mindfulness with mindfulness to put ourselves in the right frame of mind to learn and to embrace. And then also I have made sure that this course is carved out in such a way that it's not bombarded with too many people. So I have it limited to 15 people per cohort so that I can also give personalized attention, because I will also be offering at least one one-on-one coaching session to kind of move you forward. But 6 weeks of learning, developing your HR muscle, while you also build community. So if you don't have a great HR community or a big HR community and you're looking to build that, you will find it in this program as well. So yes.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we have a dedicated website just focused on psychological safety resources. I've built a psychological safety risks calculator. So if you are trying to make the business case for investing in psychological safety, feel free to use that. That's all free. And then there's links to things like the international standards for psychological health and safety, the ISO 45003. And I have a handout there on common psychosocial hazards. So feel free to check that out. And also we have upcoming next week, I'll have all the way from Melbourne, Australia, I'll have Christopher Shen joining me. He is a psychologist and supports psychological health and safety in Australia for major construction projects and sports teams. And then we're going to be having more sessions on psychological safety coming up, including digital spaces, the learning space in the training room, as well as the executive C-suite, and specifically one focus on the cannabis industry. So keep an eye out for all of those. And I'll post our LinkedIns here in the chat. Speaking of chat, if anybody has any questions, feel free to pass those along. All right, I don't see any.
I just put the link in for the accelerator if anyone wants a direct link as well.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Julie. And I am lame and have to go find my LinkedIn. So I'm the only, Alessandria Polizzi like in the world. So there's not a lot of me, but let me go ahead and find it. There it is.
And if you click on those 3 dots at the bottom of the chat that says more, you can save it. So you can save those links for another time.
Oh, and a pro tip also. Awesome.
Yep.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. Thanks again, Julie, for this great conversation. Again, we'll have more of these types of conversations coming up over the next couple months. But with that, everybody, have a great rest of your lunch or the rest of your day. Take care. All right, bye.